Penguin Random House Audio presents Flying Home and Other Stories by Ralph Ellison. Read by Dominic Hoffman. Introduction by John F. Callahan. Read by Arthur Morey.
Introduction 1. You could never tell where you were going, Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man observed, musing over the twists and turns of his fate. You started looking for red men, and you found them, even though of a different tribe and in a bright new world. So it was with Ellison's discovery of his identity as a writer, and so it is with this collection of his short fiction. I blundered into writing, Ellison admitted in a 1961 interview with novelist Richard G. Stern. At first, in Oklahoma from the time he was 8 and his mother bought him a used cornet, music was his life. As a high school student, Ellison cut the grass in exchange for trumpet lessons from the conductor Ludwig Hebestreit, who, impressed with his earnestness and talent, also gave him impromptu instruction in orchestration. In 1933, according to his unpublished autobiographical notes, written before the publication of Invisible Man, after operating an elevator 2 years at $8 a week in a vain effort to save tuition fees, he was awarded a scholarship to Tuskegee Institute to study symphonic composition and trumpet with the famed William L. Dawson, whose Tuskegee choir opened Radio City. Unable to afford train fare, he made his way from Oklahoma City to Alabama, hoboing on the freights of half a dozen railroads. A year after coming to New York in the summer of 1936, hoping, vainly it turned out, to earn the money for his senior year tuition, Ellison met and struck up a friendship with Richard Wright. Having finished but not yet found a publisher for his first book, Uncle Tom's Children, Wright encouraged Ellison to review a novel for the fall 1937 issue of New Challenge, which he co-edited. Ellison complied. My review was accepted and published, he recalled, and so I was hooked. Yet one review does not make a writer, let alone turn a musician into a fiction writer. Once again, Wright intervened, and the shadow of Ellison's destiny moved closer to the act. On the basis of this review, Ellison recalled, Wright suggested that I try a short story, which I did, again for New Challenge. I tried to use my knowledge of riding freight trains. He liked the story well enough to accept it, and it got as far as the galley proofs, when it was bumped from the issue because there was too much material. Just after that, the magazine failed. The story was Jaime's Bull, and at the top of the first page of the final typescript, Ellison drew a rectangle around the year 1937 in emphatic black ink. Just where he wrote his apparent first story is not clear. Perhaps he began it in New York, where after a fling at sculpture he was still trying to be a musician. Life in New York that summer of 1937 was chaotic for Ellison. Like many with artistic aspirations who came of age in the 1930s, Ellison also agitated on behalf of Republican Spain and was involved in the campaign for the release of the Scottsboro Boys, 9 young black men convicted and sentenced to death on trumped-up charges of gang-raping 2 white women in a boxcar in Alabama. Meanwhile, in Dayton, Ohio, Ellison's mother, Mrs. Ida Bell, who had moved there from Oklahoma City the year before, fell from a porch, and her actual condition, tuberculosis of the hip, was gravely misdiagnosed as arthritis. In mid-October, Ellison arrived in Ohio. With only a single short story in progress to his credit, he had no idea he was at the edge of a drastic change in his life. He expected to stay only long enough to see his mother through her illness and convalescence. But he was wrong, and his experience wrenched him away from the inner moorings he thought he had made fast the previous 4 years at Tuskegee and in New York. In a letter headed Dear Folks, dated October 17, 1937, written from Dayton, probably to relatives or friends back in Oklahoma City. He tells what he had found a few days earlier at the Cincinnati hospital to which his mother had gone when her condition suddenly worsened. I arrived in Cincinnati on Friday at 5:45 to find my mother leaving, and she in such a condition that she was unable to recognize me. At 11 the next day, she was gone. She was in such pain that she knew no one. It is the worst thing that has ever happened, and I can't explain the emptiness. 10 days later, he writes Richard Wright that his mother's death marked the end of his childhood. Unlike the pretense of change he'd felt on coming to New York, the loss of his mother is real, and the most final thing I've ever encountered. His mother's illness and unexpected death became a painful catalyst for, as Ellison later told it in Shadow and Act, it was during the period I started trying seriously to write, and that was the breaking point. You have to leave home to find home, Ellison years later scribbled in the margin of a page of his novel In Progress. And that October, 1937, stranded in Dayton and emptied of emotion, Ellison, like his future character, Invisible Man, descended into the abyss of himself, confronted the darkness, and emerged resolved to write his way through the pain and loss. If geography was fate, as Ellison liked to say of his Oklahoma birth and upbringing, in Dayton fate followed from geography. Before long, an ambassador from the gods appeared in the form of Lawyer Stokes, one of the first black attorneys in Dayton, and a man whose youngest son was Ellison's age. William O. Stokes befriended the motherless, fatherless stranger. Seeing Ellison take refuge in a nearby restaurant and scrawl away in a cheap spiral notebook, Lawyer Stokes gave the young man a key to his law office. Consequently, as Ellison told it in a 1985 letter to his old friend Mamie Roan, some of my earliest efforts at writing fiction were done on his typewriter and stationery. In fact, manuscripts of several early unpublished stories were typed on letterhead of the Montgomery County Republican Executive Committee, Colored Section, an organization that had 4 committeemen, one of whom was attorney W.O. Stokes. Stokes was Ellison's benefactor in more fundamental ways. When my brother Herbert and I had lost our living quarters, Lawyer Stokes allowed us to sleep in his office and make use of its toilet and bathing facilities. A staunch Lincoln Republican despite the Depression and the emergence of Franklin D. Roosevelt, Stokes argued politics with Ellison, then a self-described young radical, who wrote on October 27, 1937, from what he called his exile in Dayton to Richard Wright in New York, that there is no daily worker nor new masses to be had here. And on November 8th, all I have here is the New Republic and the radio. Ellison recalled this most incongruous and instructive friendship with Lawyer Stokes in his 1985 letter to Mamie Roan, confessing that Stokes's aid and encouragement had helped him through what seemed a period of hopelessness. Stokes's friendship and hospitality to Ellison, after the desolation caused by his mother's passing, must have conjured up memories of Mr. J.D. for Jefferson Davis, Randolph, custodian of the State Law Library back in Oklahoma City, and self-taught expert in the law, who had treated Ralph like a kinsman in the wake of his father Lewis's death. Having once more lost closest kin, the young Ellison again found kith, this time in Lawyer Stokes. In effect, Stokes showed him the way home. He gave him shelter in his office, engaged his mind, and by encouraging him to know his work as a writer, helped him prepare to emerge as a man in the world. Little wonder Ellison told Wright that he found the streets of Dayton very much like those of Oklahoma City, home. In Dayton, he was not as lucky finding odd jobs as he had been while growing up in Oklahoma City. He lived hand to mouth, and, as he told Wright, spent most of his time in the woods, picking pears growing.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?